information session to kind of analyze how we got here and what we can do to get out of the situation that we're in, right? So right now we are in a crisis, a housing crisis. It's worse, the housing crisis right now is worse than it was during the Great Depression, right? We got neighborhoods in West Atlanta that are 50% vacant, right? And homeless people filling the streets. So how did we get here? What happened to get us here, right? So in the mid-2000s, we had banks, right? Still have banks. And they were following trends set in the late 90s. The trend was to get everyone in a home, right? Which sounds like a great idea, you know, that's a good thing. But the way they went about it was shady, right? They would give loans to anyone and everyone, and the details of these loans would be very tricky. So you have people whose interest rates shoot up after a few years, who have balloon payments of tens of thousands of dollars that suddenly become due, right? So they got lots of people in homes, but it was a gamble, right? It was a bet that they were making, a huge bet. More people got in homes, and as we saw in 2007, that they lost that bet, right? And so you'd think they'd be in a worse situation. All right, so what did people do? What did we do during the mid-2000s, right? Homes were more available than they ever were, right? So people bought them. People invested in their future. Homes are the traditional way that the American middle class has grown, has prospered, right? You get equity in your home, and that builds your future, right? So people used that equity that they were gaining as the market was going up and up and up, and got ready to, you know, live in a home and have a family, right? Settle down. Or so we thought, right? So banks set up this trend, got people in homes, and then started gambling with these homes. And that put us in crisis. So after losing their bet that home prices would keep going up and up and up, and everything would remain stable at this skyrocket rate, they got a slap on the wrist. The banks got like a slight slap on the wrist and a huge pat on the back, right, in the form of a bailout, right? And we are still feeling it today, right? 6 years after the start of this crisis, people are still losing their homes at a historic rate. So let's talk about the bailout. The U.S. government, through monetary and fiscal bailout, right? So that doesn't mean just giving money to the banks, it means the Federal Reserve's involvement as well, gave $16 trillion to the banks, right? We, the people, so that's 16 trillion. We, the people, we got a total of about 845 billion, right? There was the stimulus, which was about 820 billion, and then recently there was a settlement with the banks where, you know, they brushed off some table scraps and settled for $25 billion, right? So again, banks got 16 trillion, we got 844 billion. Let's talk about 16 trillion for a second, right? So that's the size of the bailout right there. That's $16 trillion. In December of last year, $16 trillion could have bought every house in the United States. Could have bought every house and turned it over to the community, right? Or right now, $16 trillion could totally wipe out our national debt, right? But that hasn't happened, right? So if you look at it in comparison, that $16 trillion dwarfs the value of every home in the United States and the national debt, right? Pick one, you could have solved a huge problem. Instead, the banks just decided to continue practicing business as usual, right? Let's look at what we got in comparison to the bailout, right? So the huge dark red circle there, that's a bailout, right? That tiny bluish dot, that's a stimulus package, right? And you can't really see it next to it, but that's the settlement, right? That's what the banks gave us, so kindly gave us, right? This settlement of $25 billion. And let's look at them in comparison here, right? So it's a little tricky to see on the screen, but if you squint, you can maybe see that little blue dot down there, right? There you go. That's what we've been given, right? And we're expected to just kind of accept this as the bank's generosity, right? They've been so generous and given us so much, right? So much. It's ridiculous. So again, 16 trillion to about 845 billion. Those are both huge numbers, but one is far larger than the other. All right, so this spring, banks agreed to pay out 25 billion, right? Just brush off some table scraps, really. It was intended to be spent on keeping people in their homes, right? Fixing people who are underwater, fixing their mortgages, keeping people who are struggling with employment in their homes. But that has not necessarily been the case in many states, right? So here in Georgia, we got a bit of that money, right? We got about 340 million, which is, you know, a tiny, tiny speck compared to the bailout, right? Here in Georgia, we have one of the highest rates of foreclosure in the nation. We have one of the highest rates of underwater homeowners, right? People whose banks are claiming they owe, say, like $125,000, but if they tried to sell their homes today, they'd get maybe 30, right? So that's our situation in Georgia, one of the hardest hit states in the nation. Right, so we got this 340 million. This is called the hardest hit fund, right? It's this money that's supposed to go to us, to people, to keep people in homes. This fund has been in action since 2011, and so far, $7 million of that money has been spent, right? $7 million. Another really small circle inside a really big circle, right? It's minuscule compared to the amount that is there, right? So now we need to ask why, right? The money is there, right? It's not enough money by any means, but there's some money there. So why is it that so little has been spent? And I'd like to remind ourselves that we are still in crisis, right? And that crisis is being used to make excuses, right? Excuses in government, claims that what we need now is austerity, we don't need to be giving money to people, right? We really need to promote jobs, right? And the way we do that is not by keeping people in homes, they say, but by providing larger tax cuts and using some of the settlement money. The Governor Deal wants to use about 100 million of this settlement money for corporate development, right? It's targeted for homes, but he wants to use it for corporate development, right? So we're in this crisis. And why is the money not being used? It's a combination, I believe, of these two things, right? There's state government. There's Nathan Deal and his state government who have made it extremely difficult to even qualify for that hardest hit fund, right? To qualify, you have to have started being affected by this crisis after 2008, right? And everything has to be perfect according to them, right? They've helped maybe about 1,000 people in the last year, and they're sitting on all of this money. Another reason are Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, right? And these are kind of elusive entities, right? People have probably heard the names before, but it's tricky to understand exactly what they are, right? Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are banks that basically buy your mortgage, right? They're not just regular banks. These are banks sponsored by the United States government, right? We, the people, currently own 80% of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And what they do is they will buy loans from banks. They might have your loan, right? You still might be paying to Wells Fargo or Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase, but there's a very good chance, as they own 50% of home loans in the United States, that they own your loan. So why do Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae come into play when talking about this settlement money, right? The reason that they come into play is because they refuse to do principal reduction, right? Principal reduction is, right, say you're an underwater homeowner. You bought the home for $120,000. The actual value of the home now is about $30,000. They refuse, against all other banks, right? Most other banks have started principal reduction programs. They, who we own 80% of, have refused to do principal reduction, right? Have refused to give that equity, that wealth that was taken from the American middle class during this crisis back to us. Right? And because we own 80% of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we feel that that is a pressure point that we need to be pushing on. We feel that we have power through government, through putting pressure on government to change the way Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae do business.